Welcome into this special edition of On Texas Football. My name is Gerry Hamilton, joined by CJ Vogel. Today, we're going to be talking about the wide receiver circle of trust. Our very own Rod Babers coined it the circle of trust, Sark's circle of trust. We talked before the season how it was going to expand to 6 in what we believe this season. And early in the season, it did, CJ. Now, maybe creeping back towards 5. What have you seen? Your opening thoughts on this wide receiver circle of trust, kind of how it expanded before the season and where it's at now.
Yeah, that was the big question. How does Texas get all of these guys on the field? How do they distribute the football to all of these guys? Because that's a lot of talent on the field, right? You talk about Isaiah Bond all the way down to Silas Bolden. How do you find ways for these guys to get involved with this offense? That's a lot of speed. It's a lot of talent. It's been up to this staff to find creative ways, and we've seen that over the last few weeks to kind of incorporate a Silas Bolden, find new ways for Ryan Wingo to get the rock. But what's the consistency? How do you continue to go down that path? It's tough, right? Especially when you start throwing in Jaden Blue out of the backfield and the way that he's been an instrumental piece of this offense. Gunnar Helm and his, increased involvement for this offense. It makes sense for this wide receiving group to continue to kind of close in on who your big-time guys are, especially down the stretch, right? These are big moments that Texas needs its big-time players to come up and make plays for. I think it's going to continue to shrink a little bit, right? Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Ryan Wingo. Those are kind of the 3 with DeAndre Moore right there in the mix as well. What can you do to separate yourself from the pack? Those 4 really have a really instrumental piece of this offense, and they all do something above and beyond that separates them from the rest of the bunch as well.
Yeah, so let's break this down a little bit, CJ. So Matthew Golden, the 6 we're talking about today, Matthew Golden, who's played the most snaps. We're going to talk about him first. Isaiah Bond, who has second most snaps with a missed game. Then you have Ryan Wingo, third most snaps. DeAndre Moore, fourth most snaps. Now, Wingo got more snaps due to the Bond injury against Vanderbilt. And then you have Silas Bolden with 118 snaps and Johntay Cook, 6 with 114. But that role has continued to shrink since the Mississippi State game. So obviously Matthew Golden is the guy for Steve Sarkisian in this offense. But we've seen Johntay Cook kind of move outside that circle of trust as Silas Bolden has gained more reps in SEC play. And last weekend against Vanderbilt, we didn't see Johntay at all. And we saw Silas Bolden and Ryan Wingo replacing snaps that Isaiah Bond would have had if he was not injured.
It was really interesting in that game, too, because it wasn't early on. It wasn't a concerted effort to get the ball to Silas Bolden. But in fourth quarter, you saw 3 straight targets go Bolden's direction, right? And that tells me one thing. Quinn trusts him when he's on the field, right? And that's a big piece, Gerry. I'll let you speak on this, but when you're the quarterback of this team, when you're Quinn Ewers or you're Arch Manning, the one thing that you have to have is trust and belief in your wide receivers to be in the right spot, to run the right routes, to be in a situation and understanding that you're on the same page with the quarterback. Right now, Silas Bolden proves to me that that's something that he's on the same page with Quinn Ewers with. So that's encouraging. Now, of course, what's that situation like when Isaiah Bond comes back? He obviously gets those targets, right? He's a big piece of this offense. He's going to be your wide receiver 1 down the stretch. But for Silas Bolden, I think specifically in that Vanderbilt game, it shows me one thing. Quinn trusts him. And that's huge. And I'll pitch this to you. When you have 6 guys, when you have a lot of playmakers trying to get the ball in their hands, is there any other factor that plays a larger role than trusting the quarterback when it comes to earning targets?
Yeah, I think route running, where you're supposed to be with the correct timing. Right. That's it from a quarterback to wide receiver perspective. If I'm going to audible plays at the line of scrimmage, or if we change up the play, who's going to be able to audible that? Who can I signal to? And I know they're going to run the route right with the correct timing. There's got to be full trust from QB to wide receiver. And then there's the other factor of it. That is the blocking part and everything else that goes along with it. Sark, who does he trust to, who can handle the offense, who can handle everything within the scheme, who's going to block, who's going to help the run game, who, if he changes a play up, who is going to be able to motion and handle everything, the motions, the shifts, everything in this offense, while at the same time having the trust of the quarterback. I think we've seen those guys really step to the forefront. It's obvious it's obvious Matthew Golden is the most important receiver for Texas this season. And when you take everything into account, he plays the most snaps by far, CJ. And now I think second is obviously Isaiah Bond. And then third is DeAndre Moore. Isaiah Bond obviously was injured, and that's what gave Wingo the jump over DeAndre Moore in snaps. But those three guys have the full trust of Quinn and Sarkisian combined. That, I think, is the key.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And it's tough because you watch a guy like Ryan Wingo, and every play is a big play, right? He's averaging north of 17 yards per reception. You add in the running factor, and I mean, it feels like every touch is going for 20-plus yards. But how do you get him to find the ball more? How do you get him involved with this offense more? It's trust, like you said. It's knowing that he's going to break off his right at 13 yards to come back to 11 on the comeback. That's what they've been practicing all year, right? Does he run that effectively in practice? That's something that I think takes some time, especially – and I know that was the big question mark coming into the year. Quinn's got a brand new bunch of wide receivers, right? Johntay Cook, DeAndre Moore. Those were kind of the two elder statesmen, quote unquote, coming back in this offense. But what do they do to separate themselves? We've seen it with DeAndre Moore. He's going to put his hat on a guy and find ways to displace him in the running game, in the blocking game, in the quick screen game. He's been effective, and he can win one-on-one routes going deep. What can you do to find the field? That's a big part of this offense, and that's why we're seeing this kind of group separates because, well, everybody finds their own little niche, and they're separating themselves from the bunch in their own regard there.
CJ, what have you found in SEC play for snaps per game? Has it been the four guys separating, Silas Bolden moving ahead of Johntay Cook, and Jontay Cook snaps really going down, especially since Mississippi State? Is that kind of what you found? Because you put out the weekly snap numbers. Is that kind of lining up with what you've seen?
Yeah, it is. And what's interesting is you look at the entire snap count for the entire season, and you see Silas Bolden and Jontay Cook having basically the same amount of snaps, right? It doesn't feel like that over the last few weeks.
Not at all.
Especially when it comes to target share, right? You haven't seen Jontay Cook more than what? About 20 snaps since that Mississippi State game?
Yeah.
But that long-term, early on kind of focus there to get Jontay reps, to get an understanding of what he can be in this offense, that carries weight. So I think you're, again, seeing that trend, right? Jontay played 38 snaps against ULM. It's a lot of snaps. That's basically half the game. Now, you haven't seen him so much in SEC play. And, of course, that drop against Mississippi State, unfortunate. But that's kind of the lasting impression that you get is when you get limited opportunities, do you make the most of them? Can the staff trust you to catch the football, to run the right routes? Can they trust you when your number is called to make a big play? You've seen his snaps diminish a little bit, and you've seen Silas Bolden's increase. That's been a week-by-week thing with Silas. Of course, remember, he had a 700 yards at Oregon State a year ago. He's a guy that's proven. He's a guy that has experience in these big games. His role's increasing as a result. So if you're Jontay Cook, I'll pitch this to you. How do you find the field? Is it just strictly practice? Is it when your number's called? Do you just have to make a play? Do you press a little bit further? How do you find a way to earn that trust of Quinn Ewers?
Yeah, I think the tough thing for Jontay is Matthew Golden's not coming off the field. That's obvious, right? Isaiah Bond has a speed factor that nobody else has to that level. Ryan Wingo's got a playmaker after the catch and size advantage that nobody else has. And DeAndre Moore has a best all-around receiver on this team that nobody else has. And so what makes that a difficult situation for a Jontay Cook and somewhat Silas Bolden? But I think if Silas Bolden had been here for the spring and really learned a system, he'd probably be playing even more. But the tough thing for Jontay is then, okay, so if you line up outside, you're not the touchdown maker that Isaiah Bond is or Ryan Wingo is.
Right.
Are you going to be the red zone guy that Matthew Golden is? No. Are you going to be the all-around wide receiver that DeAndre Moore is? Not to this point. So that's the tough thing is where do you find that. You have to find your niche, and you have to build kind of your role within a team. Because the problem is, if you're not in that top 4 right now, all 4 of those guys are NFL players. So it's not like, other than a sustained injury, that you're going to just suddenly midway through the season start taking reps from those guys. It's not happening. So that's the tough spot that Jontay's in. And we talked about this before the season. We talked about DeAndre Moore and Johntay Cook, how important fall practice was for them, because if they cracked the door open, because they knew this offense better than anybody else, if they left the door cracked, then the talent of those other guys were going to burst through the door. DeAndre Moore shut the door on competition. Shut the door. He has to be on the field. He's a big playmaker. He's a key in the run game. He makes plays on special teams also, right? So he does a lot of endearing things for the Texas staff. Silas Bolden, one of the advantages he has over Johntay Cook is he is the punt returner. He makes the play against Oklahoma, just the pure hustle play. He's endeared himself to the coaching staff. What has Jontay done to endear himself to the coaching staff to where he could expand a role? If Jontay's going to do it at Texas, it's really going to come down to patience, continued development, and then after, which we're going to get to, Bond goes pro, Matthew Golden goes pro, Silas Bolden's gone after this year. You have to burst through the door and take it in the spring if you're still at Texas. That's what's going to be interesting to see moving forward at this wide receiver position.
Yeah, I agree 100%. How do you separate yourself? That's kind of been Jontay's entire thing at Texas, right? How do you find a way where the staff needs you on the field because of your skill set? You got it with everybody you just mentioned, right? Bonded to the speed. Golden, I mean, we've seen him time and time again win in red zone. He can block.
Yeah.
He's a guy that does the little things very well. DeAndre Moore, very much the same thing. But here's the thing with DeAndre Moore. He's got 17 catches this year. That's it. 5 of them have gone for touchdowns.
Yeah.
So when he gets targeted, he finds ways to make the most of it, right? That's almost a 30% clip when it comes to your touches, your receptions going for scores. You've got your niche when it's DeAndre Moore. He's going to be the guy that puts a hat on the guy, moves him out of the way, and gets some extra yardages for the offense. That's huge in this offense when we talk about the screens, the bubbles, the short yardage situations. You need a guy like that, and that's why he's on the field as often as he is. That's why it's such a struggle right now to find different opportunities. And I've likened this last year too. Texas had Xavier Worthy, they had Adonai Mitchell, they had Jordan Whittington. Why would you take them off the field? You know what they're going to give you. Yeah. Why do you take if you have 3 Ferraris, Gerry, why do you drive the Porsche? You don't. Yeah.
Right. And the thing that you pointed out too is, like, DeAndre Moore has 17 catches, 249, 5 touchdowns. And he's been the victim of a holding call or two that have cost him catches and touchdowns, right?
Yeah.
When Jontay has come into the game and had opportunities, he hasn't made the most of his opportunities. So if you come into a game and you don't make the most of your opportunities, then where's the trust going to – that's how you get removed from the circle of trust, as Rod Babers calls it, right? So you're not a factor on special teams, because that is Matthew Golden and that's Silas Bolden and that is DeAndre Moore in coverage on special teams. Golden and Bolden in the return game. So everything boils down to what you do in your reps at wide receiver in a game. And if you struggle in that at all, knowing the other guys are not, then why would the staff keep you in the circle of trust at that point? Because their job's to win football games. I mean, in Mississippi State, that drop touchdown, we talked about it, that drop touchdown pass was not a factor in Mississippi State game. But can you imagine if that had happened against Georgia?
Yeah.
Could you imagine if that happens at Arkansas, at A&M? That may cost you the game.
Yeah.
May cost you the game. And that's so Jontay's got to get to a point where if he's gonna ascend at Texas, he's got to make the most of his opportunities. And that's the one thing he has not done on Saturdays to this point.
I agree. And fortunately, there's opportunities down the road, right? You got 4 games in the regular season. You got whatever comes in the playoffs. But even beyond that, this wide receiving room opens up after 2024. And I think that's the next part that we wanted to talk about is, what's the future of this group look like? Texas looks really good on paper right now, right? There's no say. We just mentioned 6 guys that you could look at and say, all right, they're on the field. I know that they have at least the big-time opportunity to make plays because of their talent. Now, 2025 is a different story because you could argue at least 3 are gone.
Yeah.
What happens beyond that? Isaiah Bond, NFL, Matthew Golden, NFL, Silas Bolden, perhaps NFL as well. What does this room look like in 2025, Gerry?
Yeah, so let's go through that. Isaiah Bond's getting mocked in the first round of NFL drafts. So he's going to be a first or second round pick. If he runs in the 4.28 range, he's going in the first round, right? Especially considering the production he's had in Sark's system and that he's had a smooth transition from Alabama to Sark's system. That's a very positive for him in an NFL draft. Ryan Wingo's a future first round player if he stays healthy. Matthew Golden, that's the one people are asking. Is he going to go pro? Or is he going to stay? Well, if you're a third, let's just say he's a third or fourth round pick, he's going to go pro. You put in 3 years in college. Just look at how much the salaries and contracts have ascended in the NFL with the new TV and bargaining agreements, right? You're going pro if you're a third or fourth round pick. I mean, there's just no way you're not. And then Silas Bolden will be gone. He'll either be a all CFL type of receiver or he'll be in an NFL training camp, right? So, but then you have the high school recruits. You have Jamie French and you have Khalil Lockett to go with Parker Livingstone, Ryan Niblett, who will he say running back? Will he move to wide receiver? Because here's the other thing about Ryan Niblett. If you looked at the Sark circle of trust on offense, Ryan Niblett's more in it right now than Johntay Cook is.
Stock is rising.
If you look at the last 3 or 4 games, Ryan Niblett, Sark's found the way to get Ryan Niblett on the field and involved, even in a minor role, as much as he can. So, again, the outside receivers coming in this class, you have Parker Livingstone, who's redshirting, but then you have Khalil Lockett, who is a X all the way. You have Jamie French, who can play X. He can play. You can move him around. You can pretty much be like DeAndre Moore. You can do a lot of things with him. Then you have Dalen McCutcheon, who is very similar to DeAndre Moore. So again, with the guy, even though it looks great because Bond's going to go in the first or second round, probably first. Golden should go pro, third round type pick. Silas Bolden will be gone. What the guys coming in are all midterm enrollees. You have Parker Livingstone coming off a redshirt year as an outside receiver, as a 50-50 ball guy. And you have these other guys coming in at midterm, all 3 of them. So again, and then you have CJ, Texas is going to take at least 1 guy in the portal, or are they going to take 2? So it's hard for me, if we're just being real, to see where Jontay ascends right now at Texas. I'm not saying he can't. He's got to find his niche and he's got to find his role.
That's the biggest thing. Again, I'll continue to pound the drum is what can you do to separate yourself from the pack? Everybody that we've seen and that everybody that we've mentioned so far has something. Speed, blocking, short game ability to get loose in space. If you're Johntay Cook and for the most part, 8 catches for 137, that's a pretty good stat line, right? That's not bad. We're averaging 17 yards of reception there, 2 scores. That's great.
But the expectation was 30 for 450 this year.
Exactly. And so when those balls go your way, how do you separate? How do you make yourself known? How do you remember, or how do you let this staff remember that whenever the ball goes your way, you're trusted? Yeah. That's the big point. And I don't know if those opportunities are going to be prevalent on the road against Arkansas. I don't know if they're going to rise on the road against Texas A&M and College Station. Texas has to go with the guys that they trust, the guys that they know are going to step up and make the plays. And right now, that's DeAndre Moore, that's Matthew Golden, that's Isaiah Bond, Ryan Wingo.
And then when you look ahead to Arch being the quarterback next year, look, he has a good rapport with Jontay Cook, right, in the short intermediate game. But next year, what does Arch Manning do well? He presses the ball down the field. What does Sark want to do? He wants to throw the ball down the field. Well, you have guys coming in without even looking at who Texas could go after in the portal. Khalil Lockett's a 50-50 ball winner down the field. Jamie French is and can be that, but also after the catch is really good.
Yep.
So you look at that and you're like, okay, well, these 2 guys coming in, you can already identify Khalil Lockett, what he's going to do really, really well, maybe better than anybody outside of Ryan Wingo at the receiver position. You can already see it. He's a 50-50 ball winner. He's a back shoulder guy. He's a guy who if Arch Manning is looking to press the ball down the field, or if Arch is in trouble, he can throw it to a spot and Lockett has at least a 50-50 or 75-25 chance to win that ball. Same thing with Jamie French. They're bigger receivers. They just are that's just what they are, and that's their strength. And then you see Jamie French with that ability to move all around the field and to kind of be one of those guys that Sark likes with size moving around the field. A guy that's 6'2", going to be 195, 200 pounds, going to have a Donnie Mitchell type of frame. So you look at it and you're like, man, this was that's why I've kind of said, CJ, this was Jontay's season at Texas to really find a niche, because the guys coming in behind you, you know what they're going to do and you know what their strengths are. And now that DeAndre Moore is really established, nobody's moving that guy off the field next year at Texas.
Right.
He'll probably end up playing the number of snaps that Golden did this season, next season for Texas. Nobody's moving him off the field. So where are those snaps? And Wingo next year will probably be a 350 to 400 snap guy at this point in time. So where are those snaps really going to come from? That's what we're talking about with Jontay Moore and Jontay Cook. And look, we're not being – I just want to say this. We're coming to the end of this. We're not being hard on Jontay Cook. What we've decided, CJ and I decided to do was we've had a lot of questions in the chat about Jontay Cook and the circle of trust at wideout, about Quinn Ewers, NFL draft stock, Jaden Blue, NFL draft stock. We're going to talk about those two guys coming up. But we wanted to talk today to give the Texas fans the answers they wanted from our perspective. What is Jontay Cook's future at Texas? What does that circle of trust look like?
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think that answer just boils down to separate yourself.
Yep.
That hasn't been the case so far. Again, 10 targets on the year. He's had 60 pass snaps, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 137, 2 scores. It's fine on paper, but that's not the season that you were expecting coming in if you're Jontay Cook. And again, with the way that these guys are finding niche roles to contribute when the ball doesn't go their way or whenever there's other aspects to the game of football that doesn't include toting the rock, they're finding ways to contribute. That has to be a key for Jontay moving forward as well.
Yeah, and I want to say this. I want to end with this. We're not saying Jontay Cook can't be a really good player, because he is, and he can be a really good football player. What Jontay is now facing, and a lot of these kids face it, is they face the adversity, and with that adversity comes, okay, you have development, you still have time within your developmental time in your window, but the key thing is you have to find a niche, you have to find a role. If you stay in the current program you're at. That's the big thing, is what is that niche? What is that role? You have to really find it while still staying on your developmental path. And I think that was going to be the issue this year when that receiver, that circle of trust expanded to 6. And once you saw, CJ, Matthew Golden was Quinn's guy in the red zone. He is his most trusted wide receiver. And then when you saw Isaiah Bond make a smooth transition from Alabama to Sark's scheme, because he has speed that nobody else has and experience with that speed. And then you had DeAndre Moore. Once DeAndre Moore locked in to that Jordan Whittington role and does so with more natural NFL talent, you're like, whoa. And then you have Ryan Wingo. It's just a matter of time before he starts making big plays. Even with Silas Bolden early in the season, coming off the Michigan game, I think, CJ, we're all saying, it's going to be tough for either Silas Bolden to get on the field a lot. But again, Silas Bolden brings something in the return game and the hustle game and everything he does. And as a willing blocker, he's just 160 pounds. So that was going to be the tough thing. Who could remain in that circle all season when the game started mattering versus competing for an SEC championship and staying in the national championship and playoff picture. But CJ, I wanted to end with this because you listened to Sark's press conference. Monday, he mentioned wanting to get Jontay Moore involved, I believe. Do you think we actually see that in these last 4 games?
You know, it's funny because he said the same line after Oklahoma a year ago when Texas fell short to the Sooners. And he's sitting there thinking, he said, yeah, Jontay only had about 5 snaps. I got to get him on the field more. He didn't the rest of the year. I don't know if that lip service is anything more than just that, right? That's kind of where I'm at. If he wants him on the field, he puts him on the field. He's the guy that calls the shots. I think that's kind of where we're at right now is, listen, if he's going to play, he'd be on the field.
That's kind of where I come out as well. All right, for CJ Vogel, I'm Gerry Hamilton. This has been a special edition of On Texas Football, looking at the wide receiver circle of trust.